Opened up Twitter, looked around, saw that Randy Orton was trending. I was like, figure, hey, what did he do? Whose bag did he shit in? Apparently, it was the Wrestling Observer newsletter. So everybody was shitting all over him today. And I was like, what did Randy Orton do exactly? Then I had to look a little bit further, dig a little bit more, dig a little bit more, and I see that they're comparing CM Punk and Randy Orton. For what reasons? I don't know. I'm blocked by most of these people. But then I stumble and I say, which one is more likely to be in the Wrestling Observer Newsletter Hall of Fame, CM Punk or Randy Orton? And then I see that most people are saying CM Punk because reasons. And I say, well, thank God Randy Orton isn't a nerd who cares what these people think. You know, he's just a multimillionaire who's one of the most recognizable names and most marketable names in the entire industry that they claim that they follow. Couldn't imagine going to an NBA game saying that this guy, who everybody knows for one reason or another, has been on top of this industry for over 20 years, is not a Hall of Famer, but by God, you got to get in Chili McFreeze from New Japan that nobody has any idea who this guy is. He has to get into the Wrestling Observer Newsletter Hall of Fame. I mean, he absolutely must. I mean, some guy who never really made an impact outside of his territory, oh, well, he deserves to be in the Wrestling Observer Newsletter Hall of Fame. But Randy Orton has only wrestled in WWE, and we got to downgrade that. I mean, that matters. Kenny Omega, who was only 35, that didn't main event a WrestleMania, didn't really draw any huge houses, he gets to be in the Wrestling Observer Newsletter Hall of Fame. But we have to debate whether Randy Orton deserves to be in the Hall of Fame, and he doesn't. Okay, fine. I mean, it is what it is. It's not a Hall of Fame at that point. If you're not famous, then how are you in a Hall of Fame? But, hey, it is what it is. They're allowed to do whatever they want. I just looked at it and said to myself, just call it the Hall of Guys that we like. The Hall of Guys who didn't work in WWE. And then say, what did CM Punk actually do? Well, he had a pipe bomb promo. Ooh, that was nice. And I guess he joined AEW. I guess that helped. But then he always had that legendary Ring of Honor career. I'm like, yeah, he was also in Full Impact Pro. No one cares. Those crowds, 700 people, 800 people. I mean, whatever. That was the first almost 10 years of his career or something like that. While 10 years into Randy's career, that would have been 2012. I mean, we already know he's already been what he was doing up to from 2002 to 2012, what he had achieved. But what really kind of bothered me about this whole discourse, people all of a sudden saying Randy Orton doesn't have good matches. I guess because his matches don't involve him doing a ton of flips or running in place for 100 seconds or whatever. He doesn't have good matches, despite the fact that people of several different generations, wrestlers from several different generations, not just guys who worked with him, but guys across generations, give Randy Orton. How many times have Ric Flair said that Randy Orton is the best? When Ric Flair gave Kenny Omega credit, everybody was, oh yeah, Ric Flair loves Kenny Omega. Ric Flair loves Kenny Omega. He has been spending at least the last 5 or 6 years talking about how great Randy Orton is. Crickets. So we talking about the same guy here. If Ric Flair's opinion matters when it comes to Kenny Omega, how come it doesn't matter when he talks about Randy Orton? How about when everybody talks about how great Randy Orton is? You know, how smooth he is. And he works a very understated style. Don't get me wrong on that. It's very basic. But he knows when to turn it up and when to slow it down. And that's really what everybody wants. You know, everybody wants up, 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 up. You have to continuously jump. You have to continuously run. You have to continuously do things all the time. You have to be doing something all the time. Instead of hitting your spots and knowing what your spots are and getting great reactions on your spots. It is what it is. What's the point of doing all of these flippity doodads and then people kind of crap on the finish, or nobody sees what you're doing, or anything that matters? But let's just be honest. Most people say, oh, I saw somebody say he's an entrance pop and an RKO pop, and that's it. And I say, well, if that's been working for 25 years, then you must be an idiot. If that's what you think it is, you must be an idiot. All right, so it is what it is. I think it's a very interesting subject, but it all boils down to this. The Twitter and the internet are almost completely run by guys who hate WWE. Randy Orton is one of those dudes, much like John Cena, who is sort of the face of WWE, recognizable with that brand. I've seen people say he could never work the New Japan style. I say, why would he ever want to? Why should he ever want to? And who in New Japan can work the WWE style? Why is it only one way? I mean, look, that's such a weird dynamic. Tanahashi never would have gotten over in WWE. For starters, it would have been a language barrier. So that would have been a different situation. Has no bearing on his New Japan career, which it is what it is. So we're in this position where these nerds who don't know anything about the business, who are distinctly bitter towards one company, get to vote on who's more famous because they've read books on wrestling. And their opinions are the opinions that matter. Their opinions are the ones that are quote unquote educated opinions on a subject where they're clearly not educated. I mean, it is what it is. At this point, and I've been saying this for a while, how can anybody say the Wrestling Observer newsletter has any sort of legitimacy when people who have never worked in the business get to vote on who's the most famous and who's good at wrestling and who's a draw and all this kind of stuff? They have no fucking idea. They have no earthly idea what the criterion should be for a Hall of Fame. And yet they get to decide who's in it. That's always been the bone of contention when it comes to the pro wrestling thing. In more mainstream sports like the NBA or the NFL or whatever, they got statistics, they got championships, they got, different stuff like that. But wrestling is a little bit more subjective. The championships are decided backstage, not in front of the camera. But, not through sheer performance, but through backstage. So you can't use kayfabe accomplishments. You can only say this guy did X, Y, and Z. If you say this guy drew this house because he was on top, let's say Kenny Omega drew yada, yada, yada at the Tokyo Dome. Okay, that's a fact. If he was on top and the house drew whatever it drew at the Tokyo Dome, the merch sold what it sold, all right, and that's going to be your criterion. But then when that criterion lines up towards somebody you don't like, all of a sudden the criterion goes away. Oh, Randy Orton, all those WrestleManias wasn't just because of Randy Orton. Well, you can say the same thing for all the Tokyo Dome. Just about everybody who's ever drawn any money anywhere, usually they drew more money against a credible opponent, and they drew more money at a certain time of year. So we can, or especially if it's a big event, so that, because every company has their version of WrestleMania, even the ones before WrestleMania. You had your yearly battle royal, your big Christmas match, your big Thanksgiving show. Those shows usually would draw more, have bigger audiences than usual. And if you're a top guy, you want to be at the top of that show. That's common sense. Does that mean that if you're a top guy perpetually, really, and all of a sudden you work the biggest match of the year and the house is what it is, you don't get credit for that? All right, so let's take Randy Orton's WrestleMania credits off. Let's take WrestleMania credits off. Do we get to count SummerSlams? Do we get to count all the B pay-per-views? We got to count Monday Night Raw when he was the champion. Do we get to count any of that stuff? Or is it just Randy Orton's not a draw? How do you know? What is your criterion to figure out what a guy is a draw or not? Bizarre to me, because I'm looking at it and saying, if you even considering CM Punk and you think Randy Orton isn't a bigger draw than CM Punk, I mean, he sold out a 10,000 seat arena off of rumors. So fucking what? It's 10,000 seats. When WrestleMania does 10 times that with Randy Orton on top or whatever, it probably didn't do 10 times that. That would be 100,000. What was it, like 70 or something like that? And look, he had a bad match with Triple H one year. But there was other years where Randy was having the best match on the show, easily. I mean, he has good matches, so, and it's so understated that his natural gifts are what they are, that people start to discount it at the same time. Oh, it's too easy for him. It needs to be more difficult. He needs to go out there and do superplexes. He needs to do superplexes onto thumbtacks and hit each other with barbed wire baseball bats because, that would impress dweebs who would then put him in a kayfabe Hall of Fame. Oh my word. What a bizarre thread to read. What a bizarre, I really wish I had time to sit down and read some of these tweets. Some of them are just so egregiously stupid. And a lot of it is so, it's not like anybody's even trying to think this thing through. It's almost like we've decided that Randy Orton is like Lex Luger or something. like the collective masses have just decided that CM Punk is so much better. I'm like, even if you thought that, it's such a subjective opinion. It's a wrong one, but even if you thought it was a subjective opinion, it's subjective. It is what it is. I think that if you look at them, they're kind of the reverse. Randy Orton is a great physical specimen. It took him a while for his promos to kind of catch up. While CM Punk is a great promo, but physically his matches are not all that good because his execution of anything is not really all that good. CM Punk, but both guys get over on the subject of, I like this guy, so I'm going to overlook that particular part of his game. But how could you possibly call yourself any sort of legitimate journalist or legitimate, have a legitimate Hall of Fame? And one of the most marketable and one of the most well-known athletes in your entire industry does not get voted in because reasons. Not even like an asterisk. Like Barry Bonds doesn't get put in because, steroids. Okay. You can justify that to somebody who is outside of your industry. Barry Bonds is very well known. I don't even know baseball. I don't know anything about baseball. But if you say to me, Barry Bonds isn't in the Hall of Fame, I say, well, I know who Barry Bonds is. He's a household name. Why isn't he in the Hall of Fame? You say, well, steroids. I'm like, oh, okay. So he achieved a lot of those numbers, some of the best numbers he's ever had, though, because of steroids. So now we discount his career because of steroids. All right, sure. In wrestling, are you going to do that? You're going to start deciding that certain people don't deserve to be in the Hall of Fame because they did steroids. Because if that would be the case, there'd probably be some Japanese guys who shouldn't even be in there. You're not going to do that. So what's it going to be? You mean to tell me you can't tally up merchandise sales? You can't tally up TV ratings? You can't tally up tickets and butts and seats and come to the understanding that Randy Orton's a top guy and probably deserves to be in your pissant Hall of Fame? But if you would rather have Chili McFreeze from Buckfuck, Wyoming, because he was Midwest Championship Wrestling World Title holder for 32 days or some shit, go right ahead. We over here don't give a fuck. I just trying to understand your method of research. I'm trying to understand your methodology here. That's all. And it seems that I'm never going to understand it because it's not meant to be. What it's meant to be is, hey, me and a lot of the people who listen to us say that he's not a Hall of Famer because he could never do it in New Japan. But we don't apply that same logic to New Japan. Those guys aren't known outside of that small island called Japan. But all of a sudden, those are the best in the world. Very weird, because they have movements. Because movements. Not because drawing ability. Because we like them and we have told a bunch of people to watch them on Daily Motion. That's why. Like, oh, okay, go great. Well, Kenny Omega drew a lot with Chris Jericho. Like, yeah, because it was Chris Jericho. I'm sure Chris Jericho being in New Japan for the first time in 30 years or whatever helped that house, helped that buy rate. You could thank WWE for keeping his profile alive all that time, but hey, I just thought it was very weird. And I thank God that Randy Orton is not a nerd who cares what these people think. Ultimately, at the end of the day, he probably don't even know this shit is happening. But I feel like I had to weigh in.
MagMongoSlade. Best house I ever drew, Daddy.